Welcome to the NFL Coast to Coast Player Props Podcast, brought to you by TheLines.com, coming to you from the West Coast. Josh Lander, joined by my guys Mo Nawara, and we've got Nate Weitzer on the East Coast. And we are looking at Week 3, gentlemen, of NFL Player Props here for Sunday and Monday night's games as well. We are going to be bringing you these videos each and every Friday of this NFL regular season. Want to make sure you are liked and subscribed to that page. Continue to follow along with us. Also want you to head to TheLines.com. That's where we do have our great content up for you guys all season long. Also have our great odds finder tool there where you can go ahead and make sure that you are shopping all of those NFL lines, player props, and the like to the best of your ability, as we are making sure that you get all the juice back you need there. So definitely want to make sure you head to TheLines.com. That's where we're going to have everything for you continuing to move forward, as well as this YouTube page. And like we said, we are getting into NFL Week 3 player props. A pretty good record so far, gentlemen. I know, Nate, you had a nice bounce back week 2 after a little bit of struggle in week 1. But Mo and I remain hot, hitting at least 2 or 3 out of 3 of our picks. We are trying to bring you rushing, passing, and receiving props and anything else that we do find that we think is nice and juicy, fair to bring to you guys. But we are going to kick things off as usual with passing props, and I am going to start things off with you, Nate, talking about a game that I'll definitely be watching. I think I have a little bit of money on as well. I know you'll have some interest in it. Lamar Jackson and those Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, it was a nice week, except for Tua just smashing this Ravens defense. And I know that might be a concern for some, but I think that fact that the Ravens secondary continues to struggle so much plays well into Lamar Jackson's prospects, because the Patriots won't necessarily take the air out of the ball, be able to ground and pound against this defense, which still has a pretty good front. And on the other end, I mean, the Ravens are throwing it. They're actually letting Lamar cook. His passing prop is pretty damn low. It's at 212. At FanDuel, 214, some other sites. I think I like that more than combining the rushing yards, because the Pats do tend to be pretty disciplined in terms of holding him in check scrambling. I mean, scheme is one thing, though, and actually getting him on the ground is another thing. He does have about 120 rushing yards into career versus the Pats. So if you combine them, it's at 270 there. Also getting plus odds at Lamar to throw 2 touchdowns. I mean, look, the guy's averaging 265 through 2 games against a couple. The Dolphins defense, at least, is definitely above average in my opinion. And the biggest factor here is that the Ravens are going to be completely unable to run the ball against anybody, it appears. Their O-line is dead last in RB yards created. They are dead last in the rate at which they've been stuffed on running plays. J.K. Dobbins might play, but he might be limited, so they still don't really have a back to feature. And the New England defensive line, still solid, still disciplined, as I've said, 5th in RB yards allowed thus far. So I just expect Lamar to see high usage again, and for the Ravens to be all pissed off after the way they coughed it up last week to finish this time, and for Lamar to obviously lead the way, be like the MVP candidate he is.
Wow, that's interesting, because I'm kind of on the other end of this, where I think for my passing prop, I actually I went with Mac Jones under. So I guess I'm hoping this is not a shootout. A positive practice report for Baltimore to start things out, I would say. Obviously, their cornerbacks got abused last week. It was mostly like backups. Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters haven't been healthy yet, but both of them logged limited practices on Thursday. That usually means they're going to play. And I just don't see the Patriots having the receiving weapons to do anywhere near what the Dolphins did last week. They attack them with speed deep, and the Patriots don't have that. They have a bunch of route runners, intermediate guys who kind of want to work in the 10 to 20 yard range. And one of those guys is hurt, actually, as well. Jacoby Myers, he's been the top target for them basically since the beginning of last year. It's not a great situation receiving wise, because they already are so thin there.
Does that mean my Nelson Aguilar pickup in fantasy was not that smart, or is he going to be able to blow the top off?
I grabbed Aguilar in one league. I think he's worth a look, at least like to hold and see how he does. But Yeah, I also just see this as a spot where the Ravens are going to be pissed off and motivated, man. They know they got embarrassed last week. And this is a coaching staff that I trust to make good adjustments. I like the Ravens -2.5. I mean, I like them -3 even, so I definitely like them -2.5. And I definitely like them to limit Mac Jones. Under 244.5 is the number. And Mac, he's never been a high volume guy, so it's just a little bit higher than I thought I was going to see there.
I mean, I think both things can be true because you're looking at a Ravens team that blew a 14-point lead, and they're not going to let their foot off the gas pedal, even if the Pats aren't able to come back. I mean, Mac Jones, I do think that Ravens secondary has a bounce back. I am very down on Mac Jones and his receiving weapons. But, I mean, Lamar at 212, that's something he's surpassed in 10 of his last 12 games that he's completed, and one of those being against the Browns, a division matchup. I think you can put up those numbers pretty easily. I mean, you could put them up in the first half potentially. The way he's throwing it right now is much, much better. The Ravens do look like they have improved weapons, and I think it's just the lesson learned from blowing a big lead is the biggest thing to watch here with the Ravens. That I don't think even if the Pats struggle to score, that the Ravens are going to slow down in terms of their pass play rate.
No, either way, everything we're saying can be correct at the same time. I think I'm a little bit scared of Lamar Jackson's passing just because of the fact that the rushing game isn't there. I'm a little bit scared of his stats in general. He's obviously been very efficient. They rely on those big plays, which scares me a bit when I talk about taking over on him, just how much they need those chunk yardage plays based on the fact that we all know that everything is designed around a run from either a back or Lamar, and everything that they throw is really an offshoot of that expectation from the defense. I don't think they have that run. I think J.K. Dobbins is obviously a huge reason that they're not as good. That running back cut by committee without him is just absolutely putrid, to the tune of basically the worst run game in the league at the moment. And even though they have one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the league, probably second best all time to someone named Mike Vick. So I'm going to finish things off here, though, gentlemen, with the passing prop of Mr. Brady. I'm going to continue to fade him. I'm going to continue to go under on him. It was 277.5 last week. We were all over that. It's 245.5 this week. And it's against a better defense, to be honest. A much better passing attack anyway in the Packers, who are limiting teams to the fourth least amount of passing yards so far. Granted, one of those games was against a bad passing team in the Bears. But at the same time, start with Brady under 245.5. Perriman's questionable. Godwin's questionable. Julio's questionable. Gage is questionable. Scotty Miller's questionable. Mike Evans is out for defending Tom Brady in a scuffle last week. Brady's dealing with his own finger injury. His career versus Green Bay is pretty bad. 215 passing yards a game against Green Bay in his career. Through 2 games so far, he's 23rd in yards, 5th worst completion percentage, 23rd shortest yards per completion at 6.5, 20th in passer rating. The man only has 17 passing first downs, which is what Green Bay's defense does not allow, passing first downs, or really first downs in general so far this year. So I think there's a lot to like about the fact that Brady's coming into play against a really, really good Green Bay defense, at least passing attack-wise, a good Green Bay defense, and one that we'll be looking to, go ahead and just load up on him and see what he can do, because I don't think they're worried about any of those receivers at this point. So you're going to have to convince me to bet on Brady before I stop betting against him so far this season. That's for sure. Let's move on to rushing, though, Nate, and kick us off with who you're looking at. A pretty interesting game, I think. I'm really loving what I've got with the Raiders in this game against the Titans. I know the Titans have a very good rush defense, though, which is what we're talking about in this section against Josh Jacobs.
Well, they did last year. I mean, they were absolutely elite down the stretch in terms of their defensive line. So far, not so good against Saquon, who just kind of created a lot of yards on his own, and against the Bills, who just absolutely steamrolled them. But, I mean, this is another narrative where it's a pissed off team, or really more of a desperate team. And it's me trusting Mike Vrabel to have his guys playing at a much better level, to have that defensive front playing up to their talent level. And really, it's just that Josh Jacobs is not a running back to target in any sense of the word. I mean, the Raiders are averaging 17 carries per game. That's second lowest in the NFL thus far, despite leading in the second half last week before coughing it up. Jacobs has run a bunch of routes, but he is basically a non-factor with a 2.7% target share in that pass-heavy attack. I mean, he needed 19 carries to get over 60 yards against Arizona's defense, which is utterly terrible. Tennessee, I think, can certainly play much better up front. His prop is 61.5 for rushing yards, or 63 at FanDuel. There's a couple exploitable lines at FanDuel that you can shop those real quick with our prop finder. And I like combining the receiving yards because, like I said, I mean, I don't think he has a catch yet through 2 games. The Raiders are using other guys in that role. So 76.5 if you include his receiving yards. Seem pretty confident about the under there. And just fading that usage because the Raiders are just, a Derek Carr and Josh McDaniels led team is not going to just suddenly become the Cleveland Browns and say, we're going to build ourselves through the running game. There's too much ego there and too much fun to be had with all those weapons.
So for mine, I went with Aaron Jones under. Also looking at that same game that I guess we probably all agree that there's not going to be a lot of offense in Tampa Bay, Green Bay. The market definitely thinks so. Total sitting, I think, at 40.5 last I saw. Really interesting the way the Packers are using their running backs so far. It's actually been more touches for A.J. Dillon each of the first 2 games. 18 to 15 last game, so very close. And then week 1, A.J. Dillon had 10 carries and Aaron Jones had 5 carries. So I'm wondering basically if Aaron Jones' huge game, because he still had 130 yards last game, if that's kind of obscuring the fact that he's maybe got a smaller role than A.J. Dillon. And then you look at this matchup, Tampa Bay, they were the number 5 defense against the run in EPA per play last year. I know they've been allowing a few big runs early this year, but it's all the same personnel as last year, and they still rank 8th in EPA per play allowed. So I'm guessing that's going to get cleaned up, just smoothed out, I guess, by just playing some more games. And then I'm looking at this Green Bay injury report. Again, same as Tampa Bay, multiple receivers logging DNPs through Thursday. Alan Lazard hasn't practiced. Christian Watson hasn't practiced. Sammy Watkins hasn't practiced. And Randall Cobb hasn't practiced. Randall Cobb only an illness, but the other ones have actual injuries. So I'm wondering if Aaron Jones is going to need to run more routes. The number on his rushing is 52.5. I do think under is a decent look here. I know it's not the biggest number, and I know he just ran for a bunch last week, but I think the usage is kind of hidden by the fact that he had so many yards last week, and it's going to be tough for him to be that explosive against a much, much better Tampa Bay defense.
And that's really what it comes down to for me is that Tampa Bay defense and the fact that I think at this point we know that there's nobody for Aaron Rodgers to really feel comfortable throwing to outside the numbers, really even in the slot at this point where they've tried to move Lazard a couple times and that's worked in the red zone a bit, but not really all over the rest of the field. It's odd to me that he only has those 3 targets. He had 5 targets in week 1, 3 targets last week because of the fact that A.J. Dillon seems to be the runner. And Aaron Jones, we know, is such a good pass catcher out of the backfield. I am going to continue to sprinkle a few on A.J. Dillon in his receptions, though. I will say that. I do like that bet as he continues to get 2 to 2.5. He's been a surprisingly good pass catcher out of the backfield so far in his early career. So I feel pretty good about continuing to get plus odds on him to get 2 to 3 receptions in a game when he's getting 3 to 4 targets just coming out of the backfield pretty open. So I'm with you guys on that one too. I'm going to finish things off on the rushing side here, guys, with an over, as we went under on those first 2. David Montgomery has impressed me so far. That first game against the 49ers, I'm throwing out for the Bears. I'm throwing it out for both teams, really. I'm not really concerned with that, the puddle that they were playing in at Soldier Field all day. But so really week 2 against a Packers team that continues to struggle against the rush, but good news for Montgomery. He's playing Houston, who struggles just as much, if not more, against the rush this season. And really just the last 2 seasons, they are just porous on defense. And Chicago's going to run it. They're 9th in rushing attempts. They have the fewest pass attempts this season. Not sure how long Justin Fields' rope is, but he doesn't look great so far, and David Montgomery does. I mean, if you watch him run, he looks like a top 5 back right now. And so I would feel really, really good about them, giving him the ball 18 to 22 times this game. And if he gets that, 4 to 5 yards a carry that he's got so far this season, I feel pretty good about Montgomery going over there.
Yeah, I like that pick, and I also like Dameon Pierce, who I have in the article this week. I mean, in week 1, the Texans were perplexingly trying to ride Rex Burkhead as some sort of early down workhorse. I think they figured that out. I mean, neither of these teams have faced such low quality as each other, and I think that gives them a chance to actually establish the run and feed these young guys who are going to be their workhorse. And yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying on the Packers in terms of the receptions being how both those backs are probably going to get their production. I think we'll see a lot of screenplay. I mean, with all those receivers out for the Packers, Jones and Dillon are almost the top receivers for Aaron Rodgers as well. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 50 receiving yards, but not 50 rushing yards.
Yeah, well, and let's move on to receptions. I'll actually start with you, Mo, so we can kind of keep it to this game, since I know you're talking about Mr. Mooney. Darnell Mooney hasn't really come on this season like he finished last season. I know that we talked about Justin Fields' rope being somewhat short at this point because he's missing some pretty easy throws at times, not making all of his reads, really can't really get through very many progressions during the plays. So Mooney, though, 42.5 yards. This is a game that you feel pretty good for him to at least come through with some solid numbers for your props.
Yeah, so this is another one where I guess I'm a little bit negatively correlated with your guys' picks. Mooney he's a good receiver. I mean, he's a good receiver, and he just hasn't been involved whatsoever so far in their attack this year. It's like shockingly low. 2 targets total, like not 2 per week, 2 targets total, 1 in each of the first 2 games. And you brought up how Chicago's 9th in rushing attempts. They're 65% of the time they're running the ball. That would have ranked first by so many country miles last year. It's outrageous. Nobody surpassed 50% last year. So for Chicago to be running 65%, I mean, that 9th in rushing attempts is like kind of honestly underselling how much they're running the ball because their pace is so low. Only Seattle's slower than them, I believe. So I do feel like coming into this week, they know Mooney's a good player. Mooney's probably pissed off. He's not been involved at all. I do feel like they're going to make an effort to get him involved. And it's just a great time to buy low, I guess, is what I'm thinking here. I mean, the number is so low compared to the type of production he was putting up last year. 42.5 is what we're looking at for the line here. And last year, he was averaging almost 62 yards per game. Last week, Chicago only did 17 dropbacks, and Mooney ran a route on 16 of them. So when they are passing, he's still out there running routes. They're just not finding him. But I think that's a fluke because last year he was so clearly Justin Fields' number 1 option. So I think he should bounce back this week. I know nobody's going to want to start him in fantasy, and I get that, but you can fire a prop here, and I think it's good.
Well, I hope that you are somewhat right because I also have Cole Kmet, and he has the same amount of targets. So you're right. They're just not even throwing the ball because even in those 17 dropbacks, I believe, he fired off 14 passes. I mean, so there's really nobody on this team I want for fantasy. If you're calling a breakout game for Mooney alone, I think that just negatively correlates to any other receivers on the team as well, just from the standpoint that there's not enough balls to go around, right? So you're really just hoping that he's garbage in that sense and just eats up all those targets. So, Nate, what says you about a Mr. Mooney and maybe a pick that you like for receiving here?
Yeah, I mean, nothing wrong with taking multiple guys from the same offense if the value's there. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with Mo saying that number's too low for Mooney, and you're saying the number's too low for Montgomery. The Bears, they can pull out of this complete ridiculous quagmire that they've been in thus far and get both those guys their numbers. I'm looking at the wildly oscillating Tyler Lockett, who tends to go from about 115-yard games down to like 25 pretty frequently. And even though it looks like a pretty good matchup against the Falcons, I think their corners are pretty talented, to be honest. I mean, they're still struggling thus far, but I mean, they faced Cooper Kupp and the Saints wide receivers who are pretty talented as well. So, I mean, AJ Terrell, Casey Hayward could do a pretty good job on Lockett. The Seahawks, like Mo said, playing at one of the slowest paces in the league. They have the 4th lowest passing yards per game despite passing at the highest rate thus far. And now they're going to try to get Kenneth Walker more involved. They're trying to get all their running backs involved at the same time against San Francisco. It's kind of a clown show in terms of their offensive scheme. Geno, big step back in week 2. He doesn't have the same chemistry with Lockett that Russell Wilson had, despite the big game from Lockett last week. You look at Lockett's last 5 games without Russell Wilson. He had 2 big games in there, and then the other 3 averaging 25 receiving yards per game. So 58.5 seems high for me. I mean, you could be scared of the big shot play, and then maybe you want to go under on 5.5 receptions instead. But I think the volume won't be there because the Seahawks play so slow, and because they, aren't able to consistently push the ball down the field.
Maybe not. I actually don't love it only because look, I agree with you. Lockett is very up and down. My thinking here is the reason he's up and down is DK Metcalf is getting a ton of those of attention. So if you look at the games where Lockett, and there's a few of these, and I've done this research because once again, he is on my fantasy team this year in my deep 14-team league. So I've done the work to know when DK Metcalf is getting the ball forced to him, when he's getting 8+ targets, yes, Tyler Lockett is now screwed because they're just locked in on Metcalf, which is understandable. When you look at him, you think you can throw it to him. He has a catch radius of almost Randy Moss, so you feel pretty good about it. But at the same time, Lockett is somebody who once they get off of Metcalf, I think Geno Smith and him have had at least 2 of those games, like you mentioned, out of their 5 together that have been pretty nice. I'm speaking out of hope here in that he's going to continue to perform for me as a fantasy player. But I can appreciate the under, and I wouldn't really argue too harshly with you about it, just that it's not necessarily the lock that I would like it to be. But I'm going to finish things off here, gentlemen, with my final receiving pick, and that is Christian Kirk, somebody I talked about actually in our very first video. We didn't really, I didn't take him. I did like the Jags in that first week matchup. They lost that one. But Christian Kirk, I've been talking about him because of that $72 million 4-year deal that he signed with those Jags in the offseason. I think we've seen it too many times where you sign a big wide receiver and then you just use the crap out of him so that you can justify paying him $18 million a year. Such has been the case with 18 targets through 2 games for Kirk. He's earned them. He's got 12 receptions, almost 200 yards and 2 TDs. He's averaging 7 yards after the catch there. His yak is just going nuts this year as he's just running really, really hard, which was huge in that last game for those 78 yards. He just scored against the Chargers, who, by the way, have 2 very, very good cornerbacks and are number 4, I believe, in the league in terms of allowing stats to opposing wide receivers specifically. So the Chargers, while giving up a few passing yards here and there this season, middle of the pack really, they are also pretty good against wide receivers. I don't care. I think Christian Kirk is going to continue to get 8 to 10 targets a game. I think he's going to continue to prove that he's the route runner and shifty guy out of the slot that can really give teams fits. And I think Trevor Lawrence is a much better quarterback than we were led to believe under Urban Meyer, essentially.
Love what the Jags are doing in the passing game so far. I would wonder, I guess, just look for how often he's lining up in the slot so far, and whether J.C. Jackson is out there for the Chargers, because he's just a really good cornerback. So that could maybe affect. I do see Zay Jones and Marvin Jones as kind of more of outside guys. So I guess it wouldn't surprise me if Kirk was getting a lot of slot snaps so far, but I haven't looked into that at all. So yeah, he's been really good. I was wondering about, honestly, Trevor Lawrence is under. It's just a really, really tough Chargers defense, man. I mean, Patrick Mahomes had all he could handle in that game.
Yeah, I was looking at Lawrence under as well, and I am concerned about the slot. I mean, he's like 94% in the slot so far. That's where he's thriving. But Kenny Moore, who we faced last week, is respected as one of the top 3 slot corners in the league, and he did dust him for 678, 2 touchdowns. So the Chargers are mixing in Bryce Callahan and maybe J.C. Jackson in that role. We don't know if Jackson's completely healthy yet, but I think you can bank on Kirk because of the comeback mode that we would expect the Jags to be in here as 7-point dogs on the road.
Another big reason for it, for sure. I mean, even last week they were leading the whole game, and he still got those yardage, even against the Commanders as well, similar concepts. So that is all the time we have for you guys in this one. Make sure you are liked and subscribed to that page. Continue to follow along with us as we are bringing you these player props in the NFL each and every Friday of this season. So until we see you next, happy betting.